like to start with some acknowledgements. First of all, to our hosts, the Local Area Coordination Network, and also to Community Catalysts. Thank you. This is a wonderful innovation, and we're very, very lucky to have this network. Also like to acknowledge all the local area coordinators, their allies and supporters, and all those pioneers who've been brave enough to start local area coordination in each location and in each country. I think it's taken a lot of courage. Nick asked me to say a bit about my involvement with local area coordination, and also then to share some reflections on the importance of the principles for local area coordination work and more broadly. And as Nick did say, I've been lucky enough to have been continuously involved with local area coordination since the first single site in Western Australia in 1988, and seen it grow now to an international initiative with thousands of local area coordinators in currently 6 and soon to be 7 countries. And so local area coordination is something I'm very, very passionate about, and it's where I've really felt most authentic, alongside individuals and families connected and in their local community, helping people figure out how they can get the best possible life in the community. And for me, this is a very important image about being alongside people, right next to people, not in front of people, leading people with your own ideas, or not behind people, not keeping up with their goals and aspirations, but right alongside people. It's been a process of sharing our learnings from taking local area coordination from a single site to a complete national program, but importantly also learning from the best in other countries. And so we've now got 30 years uninterrupted learning and evidence, which is very powerful. And we've also set up a cycle of reciprocal learning, which I find absolutely fascinating. So the early work in Western Australia informed some of the work in the United Kingdom, and the work in England and Wales with a broader population came back and informed work in Western Australia, where we've now started a broader initiative beyond disability, and so on. And I'm also aware of the work in England and Wales supporting the new development in Singapore in the health system, which I think will also come back and inform us about new ways of doing things. So our approach has always been to preserve the core values of local area coordination, but constantly look to stimulate change and development so that local area coordination can be the very best that it can be. Now, the 10 principles have been critical to local area coordination work. And right back in the very beginning, we used a very crude graphic. It had a circle on the left. It had a service organisation with staff and programs and all those sorts of things. And we had individuals and families around the outside having to fit into what was being offered. So all the power was with the organisations. And so we had a vision for moving to another system that had individuals and their families at the centre, surrounded by their families, their networks, their communities, and any services they might also need. We had this idea about balancing up the power in the system, sort of one person at a time. So it was a bit more of a level sort of playing field. So progressively, with individuals and families and local community members, we developed what's now called the Local Area Coordination Framework and many more of these principles. I think one of the key ideas was unpicking this idea of what is a good life for every one of us. And in fact, at one point we spent nearly a year with people right around our state having these conversations and trying to understand what it meant. And it really unravelled the primary importance of valued relationships and contribution and people who love and care about us all. These are things that money can't buy and that they're freely given. And so this sort of led to a strong focus on people, their gifts and assets and contributions rather than their deficits. So these principles became part of the DNA of local area coordination and have been applied with passion and rigour. So although the 10 principles were developed in Western Australia some time ago, they've remained remarkably robust to this day, with only occasional refinements to reflect changes in context for our work. Just want to share a couple of examples. At one point I was running statewide local area coordination in Western Australia, which huge state, 2.5 million square kilometres, only 2 million people spread out, and we had 54 local offices. So big distances, lots of challenges. But despite all those variations in context, when I travelled around the state, it was local area coordination felt the same wherever I went, because local area coordinators took the values, the principles and the framework and applied it to local context. So it may have been a remote Aboriginal community 3,000 kilometres away, or it might be a bunch of older parents in a city Perth, or it might be a group of young parents with very young children in a newly developing area. So I found this to be profoundly important and powerful, this connection to people and place. And I'd previously been a commissioner and been contracting services through large organisations and felt very disconnected. But the power of this connection to people and place made a big impression on me. Also, when things went wrong in people's lives, with vulnerable people, things do go wrong, there were a number of questions I'd always ask. The first one was, how well do we know the person? The second one was, who's making decisions here? And the third one was, well, what about family and friends and local community before we start thinking about specialist services and formal solutions? So I found that the principles became a really strong moral compass for my decision making. And if I went back to the principles all the time, that provided really clear guidance. Beyond local area coordination, I've also found the principles be really robust because I spent 4 years as Western Australia's first mental health commissioner. And sort of week one in the job, the weekend newspaper was full of page after page of stories of tragedies in people's lives and where the mental health system had let people down. And there's one particular powerful story from a family where their son was very unwell. He committed some crimes, he got involved, he was charged. He was going to spend a period of time in involuntary detainment. He had a series of court appearances lined up and a very, very tragic, complicated, horrible situation. So I read it on the weekend and got to work on Monday, and I rang the family on the Monday and said, well, I'm not really sure what we can do, but I'm sort of new to this, but I've got a staff member I've recruited who was a very experienced local area coordinator from my previous work. And I said, I'll send her out and she can talk with you and we'll see what we can do. So she spent quite a lot of time talking with and understanding the person and the family and the situation, what had happened. And with just information and advocacy and support, we were able to get to the bottom of all this. And so instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on court and police and emergency departments and hospital and possible lifelong involuntary detention, we were able to get to the bottom of all that and sort that out. And a few years later, when I left my work at the Mental Health Commission, the family went to an event. In fact, they were now supporting other families because their life was going well, and they were supporting other families who were, having major problems in the mental health system. So I found this basic local area coordination approach to be incredibly powerful. Just recently, many of you will know Les Bellingham from Thurrock. I was watching a video about his work in embedding local area coordination into the transformations in Thurrock. And he used a really nice sort of analogy, saying that local area coordination and the principles were like a magnet for other similar values-based approaches. And he spoke about open dialogue, which is an approach from Finland about supporting people in mental health crisis. And so this really resonated with me, that the principles not only underpin the work of local area coordination, but they also underpin the work of many other similar approaches. And so when you start down this track, you actually start to, like a magnet, attract other people with similar values and beliefs. Now I'm just going to move on and quickly talk about this exciting new development that Nick mentioned, the new book on local area coordination that I'm working on with Nick from the network and Ralph Broad from Inclusive Neighbourhoods, and also Simon Duffy from the Centre of Welfare Reform. And we've got more than 20 contributors from 5 countries. So we've nearly completed this new book on the international development of local area coordination, featuring progress particularly over the last 5 years, and new content around evaluation, fidelity, sustainability and leadership. And it's going to include new people and populations being supported, new places, including the first national rollout across the whole country in Australia as part of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and also the first Asian country with Singapore. And also new times and contexts, including the COVID-19 pandemic response and recovery. We believe this March 2021 book will be another powerful and helpful resource for local area coordinators, as well as leaders and supporters, and will consolidate and grow our international learnings and partnerships. Now, Nick did ask me to end up with a couple of provocative questions. So I've done my best just to pose a couple of things for people to think about. And just sort of tension about what are the core principles of local area coordination? So we've had these principles for nearly 20 years. And what adjustments do we need to make, if any, to keep up with the changing times? And the second question is local area coordination doing enough about choice and control? And what is the best alignment of local area coordination work to the work on direct payments and also personal budgets? And in brackets, my code is, how do we get serious about changing the power in the system? So on that note, I'm looking forward to some wonderful speakers and to another challenging and inspiring local area coordination event. Thank you.